So my name is Inês Raimundo. I'm a PhD student in marine sciences, and I'm also the public relations officer of the Students for Sustainability group here at KAUST. And since there might be a couple of new students, I'll briefly explain what the Sustainability Seminar Series is and how we got here. So this project started in March 2020 by the Students of Sustainability, with the support of the Head of Sustainability and the Student Life Office here at KAUST. And the mission of this series is to serve as a platform for raising scientific and community awareness on diverse sustainability topics. So welcome to our first seminar of the fall semester, and if you're a new student, welcome to KAUST. For today's seminar, we will be hearing from Victoria Smith, the Executive Director of the International Sustainable Campus Network, about sustainability on campus, strategies for a greener future. Victoria is the Executive Director of the International Sustainable Campus Network and has been actively engaged with the network since 2014. And before this, Victoria was at the University of British Columbia for 8 years in various senior leadership roles in sustainability. Victoria holds a Master's of Arts in Environment Education and Communication and brings over 25 years of experience of public and private sector. A fun fact is that I actually happened to be in Vancouver last month and was lucky enough to briefly meet Victoria and give her a small appreciation gift in the name of the Students for Sustainability for giving this seminar today. So thank you so much, Victoria, for accepting our invitation. And for our attendees, at the end of the seminar, there will be time for questions. So feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you, or you can just write your questions in the chat. So Victoria, I'll hand it over to you now.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to share my slides here. So let's just get this started first. Okay, so let me know if you can see the
yeah, we can see
presentation view.
No.
Do you not see the
Oh,
title
now
slide?
it's all good. Now it's all good.
All good? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of your seminar series. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it was so great to meet you in Vancouver. So I'll start actually with the context of where I'm joining you from. And I think that you had a firsthand opportunity to see the beauty of where we live here in Vancouver. So I'd like to start with, let me just start there. Yeah, so I'd like to start with why I feel so passionate about this work and where I'm joining you from. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that I do live and work on the traditional unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And that's a really important context for us here. I personally have a really profound connection to nature, and I spend a lot of time outdoors. I love being in our forests and our mountains, and I am witnessing firsthand how much our environment is rapidly deteriorating. I don't think of Vancouver as being on the front lines of climate change and the climate emergency, but in the last few years, we've just had unprecedented weather events on top of dealing with the COVID pandemic. We're currently actually, as we speak, in a provincially declared state of emergency that was brought on August 18th because of extreme wildfire events that we are having. And we've been in this for about 3 years now. So in 2021, we had a just incredible heat dome that killed off in about a week over 1 billion marine animals on our coastline. So it's just unheard of. And then we saw from extreme drought and fire to extensive flooding that same year. And this flooding event in Metro Vancouver, you can see the photograph, will likely be Canada's most costly natural disaster that we've had so far. So all of this to say, we're back in a climate emergency again this summer. And at the same time, I have tremendous hope. Having spent my whole career building partnerships and bringing people together around sustainability and climate action, I really believe that we can come together to make change. The problem being, I think that we are resilient and that we can do a lot more. But the question that I wrestle with almost daily is will it be fast enough? So when we talk about when we think about the climate emergency and the urgency around it, I like to start with a quote by the UN Secretary General, who during a talk at Columbia University in 2020 stated how critically important universities are to the essential work of climate action. So I'm going to attempt to answer 2 questions during this talk. Number 1 is, how can networks like ISCN help universities advance whole institution sustainability? And I'll explain what I mean by that. And then secondly, how can we effectively respond to the climate emergency as academic institutions and all of us within universities that play a role? So I'm going to do that by, first of all, providing a bit of an overview for you of ISCN. Then I will present a case study. You heard that I spent 8 years at UBC in the Sustainability Initiative Office there. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail, one example of an institution that's working in this way. And then I'll sort of move back to talking a little bit about the network priorities that we have and initiatives and how university members can get involved. And I'll finish with lessons learned. So before I get into the history of ISCN, I wanted to think back to perhaps only a few of us in the seminar, if any, will actually remember what kind of technology we were using in 2007. That's Steve Jobs on the left, for those of you that don't know him, who was introducing the first iPhone in 2007. And yes, in the middle there, we actually had Blackberries that looked like that, and I, in fact, had one. And Apple MacBooks were probably twice the size and weight they are now. So why am I telling you this? Because this was the year that ISCN was started, and we can see how much the world has changed in the over 15 plus years. And the same is true for sustainability in higher education. The work we were doing 15 years ago is much different than the work we're doing today. A lot has changed in the last decade and a half. And I would argue that this mandate of sustainability in higher education is more important than it's ever been. So ISCN history, the network was started in 2007 with just a handful of universities. It was about 25 at the time. And they were really at the leading edge of sustainability. And so a number of university presidents got together and started this network. And I will speak to, and then there's been key milestones, of course, along the way, but I'll speak to each one in a little bit more detail over the next few minutes. So to set the context of ISCN, we are a network with currently just over 100 universities across 32 countries and 6 continents, all of whom who are committed to advancing sustainability and climate action. And it's important that I mention that we are global because and we're small enough that we can actually collaborate and work together. And that's a unique feature of ISCN. A lot of university networks that are truly international tend to be very significant in size, so hundreds, if not thousands of members. Or if they're smaller in sort of our size, 50 to 100 members, they tend to be regionally focused. So Japanese network, UK network, Australasian network. Whereas we have the real opportunity to have global conversations across, pretty much most of the world. And our members, we're very, very lucky to have many of the leading institutions as part of this network who perform extremely well in the global rankings, both world rankings as well as sustainability specific rankings, Times Higher Education Impact, et cetera. And your institution, in fact, is the first member from Saudi Arabia and a very, very important voice back to us and the network about the unique challenges and opportunities within your local context and your local region. So our work is guided by our charter. You would have seen on the milestones that the first charter was developed in 2010 and presented to the World Economic Forum. We decided in 2018 we needed to update our vision and direction because 2 very important global instruments had been developed in that period of time. So number 1, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of course, and secondly, the Paris Climate Accord. So we've reorganized the charter of the network to be framed around those 2 instruments. So there are 5 calls to action. And probably most important and of interest to you folks would be the calls to action at the institutional level, which are the top 3. And so the first is to truly embed sustainability in all aspects of the university. So right across governance, operations, teaching and learning, research, student engagement, community outreach, and also create an environment that really cultivates empowered and resilient student, staff, and faculty who can contribute to the work. And then lastly, we need to take the work off campus. We need to engage with external partners in industry and government and civil society to disseminate what we're learning to benefit the broader community. And then the second two calls to action are really more about the network level collaboration, and that guides my work that I do. So I'm going to just shift gears a little bit here and share with you at an institutional level, what does this actually look like? And so UBC is a great example of this work. The university is truly embedding sustainability across the entire institution. They also have the advantage of having done this work for over 30 years. So I spent my time, as was mentioned earlier, as a director in the Sustainability Initiative Office with a few different portfolios, but most recently was responsible for regional and international engagement. So I really got a chance to see firsthand the value of both being part of a global network, but also collaborating with other universities. So when I joined the team in 2014, I was asked to update our sustainability strategy, and we really wrestled with this question of what does next generation sustainability look like? We knew what sustainability looked like coming out of the Brundtland definition around sustainable development, but what was this next iteration of sustainability going to look like? And universities, in fact, are uniquely situated to tackle this question. You are the perfect people in the perfect place and perfect roles and responsibilities in the institution to really explore these questions together. So at UBC, there's been a really long history of sustainability, although understanding what that has meant and how to do it has changed significantly over the decades. So in the 100 plus years that the university has been around, UBC's dramatically transformed the campus. So it was started as an agricultural university out on the Point Grey part of the city, so kind of remote but very agricultural at the time. To what you see in the middle picture there is to parking lot sprawl is what we called it. So in the mid 70s, almost 50% of the campus was open air parking lot. So if you can imagine, it was cars and buildings, and that's about it. So to the view that it is today, which is really, reclaiming those parking lot spaces, creating green spaces, and really attempting to build out a model sustainable community in all of the ways that would function. So when I reflect back on why has UBC been so successful, what do I think of as the keys to success for a university to really tackle this work effectively? I think there's several, and I think that the first is executive champions. I think UBC has benefited from a very long history of strong executive leadership at the presidential level, at the executive level, and that really is a tremendously important asset to a university. Excuse me. Secondly, a compelling vision. It's got to be a vision that's aspirational, that gets people excited to be part of, rather than just setting small little goals and little concrete steps that a university can take. It needs to be forward thinking. Very strong student leadership has been very, very important to the university, and especially since the student climate strikes that we've been seeing over the last number of years. Of course, you need an ambitious plan to go with a vision. You need to actually have a plan in place. And the plans have been quite ambitious at UBC. So many universities are talking about making a commitment to carbon neutrality now and setting 2030, 2050 as a goal. UBC was already carbon neutral in 2010, but have worked to actually reduce real emissions over that time by over 62%. While growing the campus significantly in that period. And then, of course, strong external relationships with partners and peers and other institutions. We can't go at this alone. So that's been a real element of success for UBC. So I think what I really appreciated in early thinking that UBC leadership brought to this second iteration of sustainability planning was this notion of regenerative sustainability. I think you might have had an earlier talk on this when I looked at your YouTube channel. I didn't look at what the specifics were, but this notion of regenerative sustainability is gaining some traction. So the current narrative at the time that dominated our thinking when we were doing the second planning process was the common narrative of the damage limitation model. So we need to do less harm. We need to give things up. We need to make do with less. And that really just, we need to make our footprint smaller. But what if we could change the narrative from do less harm to thinking beyond that? So what would a model regenerative sustainability look like, moving from even net zero to net positive? So it has been a framing that resonates far more with folks, even as we navigate the climate crisis. So really the question is, what is our vision of what's possible? And if we can get people thinking and talking about that, it sort of brings on a different level of creativity and innovation around this incredibly complex challenge. So from those discussions, we developed the 20-year sustainability strategy in 2014, which was brought to board and finally approved. So it's a vision for sustainability to UBC at 2035. And that the underpinning of the vision really spoke to how could UBC enable human and environmental well-being. And the core belief of our team at the time was that to inspire people to act, we needed a hopeful vision, not one of doom and gloom. And so the 20-year timeframe is quite far out for a lot of universities doing sustainability planning. They tend to be 3-year plans, 5-year plans. But a 20-year strategy allowed us to think way beyond our current context. So similar to the 2007 technology that I showed you, when we were asking people, could they imagine 20 years out, we got them off of sort of the day-to-day details of what they were thinking about to a much sort of more aspirational way to think and talk together. And so, of course, the strategy cuts across what, again, we describe, it's a term I'll use often, whole institution sustainability, which means the university is embedding it right across the entire institution in teaching, learning, research, operations, campus infrastructure, and community and beyond. So like UBC, we're seeing many more universities in the last few years adopt this notion as campus as a living lab. It's not without its questions, and people are, what does that actually mean? I think we're getting further along in our understanding of what we define campus as a living lab as. But the core piece is that universities are uniquely positioned to test new ideas and technologies and processes and engage students and faculty to study the innovations. And it allows even more room for failure, which is something we don't often embrace and talk about and promote. And other sectors could just not necessarily tolerate the levels of evaluation and failure and learning and trying again. So when we think about corporate sector or local governments, those entities can't necessarily allow a system to not work and then figure out why it's not working and try a different approach. But universities really are in a very unique position, and UBC was in particular because they are both the landowner, the owner of the buildings, the operator of the buildings, the owner of the utility system. So it's like a mini city, but completely owned and operated by one entity, which is really allows for a lot of interesting things that can take place. And then the idea is to share the learnings beyond the campus borders. So UBC is committed to exploring sustainability at multiple scales. So the building scale, the building on the left there, the orange one, is the building that I actually worked in. It's called the Center for Interactive Research on Sustainability, CIRS. Very sort of cutting edge building, LEED Platinum. It was the most sort of cutting edge building in North America at the time it was built. But we need to take those learnings and processes and systems and technologies beyond the building scale to the campus scale, which is the middle picture. And then, of course, to the city scale, which is the city of Vancouver. The work that is being done at these multiple scales is of interest to cities around the world. They want to learn what is happening in university campuses and across the city jurisdictions in which they work. So can we learn from these living lab projects and scale those efforts to other campuses and to cities and beyond? So this slide is not super easy to read, but I'm showing it to you because the overall goal of this poster was to show the comprehensive level of activities that were going on when I was working there a few years ago. So I developed this to make the work of UBC sustainability accessible to anyone that we were speaking with, because it's important that you provide the overall context of all of the different ways and means that you're addressing sustainability and climate action. And then that allows you to get more specific about a particular area of interest that a group or an individual that you're talking to. So they understand the work that's being done in teaching, learning, research, operations, community, and how it links to the broader context of everything that's going on in the university. So it's an incredible challenge to imagine how do you put on one page everything that you're doing. And it's important to note, and which is why the little wedges of the pie there are not so easy to read in a slide, but it's important to note that each priority area had a clear set of targets and priorities and actions and evaluation metrics. So it wasn't just high-level aspiration, it was actual concrete things that were happening. So I'd actually challenge you as an institution and as a student sustainability group and working with your faculty and staff colleagues, how would KAUST develop the overall story of its sustainability work at a glance? It's a fun exercise to go through. This took us a long time. We went through many iterations of sticky tabs and brainstorming on a whiteboard of how would we possibly tell the narrative of a 30-year history and this whole wide range of activity on sort of one at a glance poster. So I'll leave that with you as a challenge if you want to take it on. I'd love to see the outcome. So just quickly on the UBC climate emergency and how academic institutions can address this. In 2019, UBC, in response to incredibly strong student demand, UBC did declare a climate emergency, which was one of the first universities at that time to do so. Cities were starting to declare, and students were pushing hard for UBC to declare a climate emergency. So it was really a watershed moment for us, I would say, at the time, because it had very strong executive support and board support, and it elevated all of the existing work that was already being done, but gave new license to do even more. So UBC's President Ono at the time, who I worked quite closely with in the last couple of years that I was at the university, pointed to how important this moment was. It was just a pivotal moment for us, for UBC, for the city, for the region, for the country and beyond. And it showed how important students were to being part of the solution. We need you to show us where we need to go. And I was just so moved by the overall process. It was quite a moment at the university. So, months and months of consultation and lots of engagement with the entire campus community culminated in a climate emergency report with 9 strategic priorities that really highlights UBC's role as a leader and an enabler and a partner in addressing the climate crisis. We are not all the experts. We don't all have the answers. We need to really think about the interrelated pieces of how to address this climate emergency with all sectors and all partners, both on the campus community and beyond. I would say this most significant framing is the one around climate justice. And you'll see that embedded in almost all of the 9 priorities, that the acknowledgement that the climate crisis really does disproportionately impact those often least responsible for it and least resourced to actually address it. And so it really, the whole initiative really seeks to advance justice that must align with the climate emergency response and also recovery efforts, around the COVID pandemic. There was so much going on that we were all globally dealing with in and around the same time. So when I reflect on why was that process so powerful, the climate emergency declaration. I would say it's threefold. Number one, it really empowered students as change agents. And we know that the climate crisis at the time and is now a top issue for UBC students, many of whom report they're experiencing profound anxiety about their futures. I'm sure that's not unique to UBC or even North America. And by giving students a real seat at the table to help shape the decisions that are being made around climate action, the university is tackling two different issues at the same time. One, the climate change and climate action priorities, as well as student mental health. So secondly, I think that it really helped accelerate things that were already happening. As I showed you, UBC has been doing so much for so long, but by declaring the climate emergency, more resources were allocated to the work. It amplified the work to a higher level at the Board of Governors. And so things like the updated process around the operational emissions, Climate Action 2030, just got more traction, and the team was asked to move faster. And also new opportunities opened up around climate-based teaching and learning and research for faculty and students. And then the last comment would be the benefit of the approach of moving beyond campus. We can tend to be very sort of insular in universities. We're working on our specific area of interest or our research project or our teaching, curriculum. But this sort of has us lift our head up and really think about the climate emergency and working to transform as a university. What is the role and the opportunity to transform the economic, social, political context and systems needed to address this, as we know, existential threat posed by climate change. So I'm just going to spend the last bit of the presentation here back on ISCN activities and how we as a network are actually helping members like KAUST, like UBC, like our other members with the work that they're doing. So after we developed the updated charter, we developed a new strategic plan, which was really meant to operationalize those last two calls to action. So we've got the institutional calls to action for our member universities, but how are we actually moving forward with our work? And so that's what the intent of the strategic plan was. And important to note that it's guided by 7 strategic priorities. And of course, like any good plan, has concrete goals and actions and metrics and indicators that we can work toward. So I would start by saying that this is a work in progress. That the work that we're doing around what is our theory of change. So I think this is an important starting point for any of the conversations that either universities are having or networks are having or individuals are having in their own research or their own work. What is the theory of change? And this has been an iterative conversation we've been having for a couple of years now. That transformational change, we're not talking about small changes. Small incremental changes are incredibly important. Transformational change is what we're after. And I really believe personally, and our team believes, that it really requires changing how we convene gatherings and how we really enable deep engagement and learning. We need to learn from each other. The world needs us to move faster. And what better way to do that than iterate on things that have already been done instead of inventing a new process or technology each time? So how do we bring people together? How do they learn from each other? And how do we truly leapfrog those learnings for the benefit of all? So how do we as a network do this? Well, probably the main value add over the last 16 years, 15 years has been our annual conference. And you can see that it's moved around the globe. It's been hosted in many different universities and in cities around the world. And the idea was really to bring people together to foster that knowledge exchange and collaboration over the course of several days together. I would say that since I hosted the conference at UBC in 2017. We've really tried to change how we deliver events, and we used Vancouver as sort of a testing ground for us. We co-hosted with the city of Vancouver to really show the importance of how a university and a city can work together in this space. And we've really built the program very intentionally, the design around having people have much more time to spend time in conversation and engagement than traditional conferences would normally allow for. So a couple of current initiatives that we have underway, and I'll speak to each one just for a couple of minutes. So Global University Climate Forum, we have a new-ish Latin American chapter of the network. We have a new fellows program. We've of course attended the last couple of climate COPs, and we are starting a series of member peer exchanges. So let me just explain each one really quickly. So the Global University Climate Forum was started by a colleague at Yale, who in 2009 at Copenhagen really saw students wanting to be more engaged. How could students really show up and be part of history and be part of the solution and be part of concrete advances as part of the COP processes? So they've started the Global University Climate Forum, which is in each COP cycle, a year-long process where student teams work on projects, and then they either meet, I guess more recently virtually, but they meet at the climate COPs and present their work, and then a report is generally created after that. So ISCN got involved in 2015 and got more engaged in the mentoring process. And then in 2019, 2020, it was moved under the ISCN umbrella. And of course, when everyone had to move to virtual programming in 2020, the uptake was even higher. So you can see that for 2020, 600 students from over 100 universities participated when COP was postponed and moved. So this is a mostly student-facing program, and one that I'm really excited about because we don't have as many things for students in our programming. So the ISCN Latin American chapter. So this really was an important outcome of our second last in-person conference in 2019 at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And there was just this really incredible conversation that started happening around, number one, the amount of momentum that was happening in schools in Latin America, but number two, how important it was for those folks to start connecting more frequently regionally. And of course, it's hard to say regionally for Latin America, it's huge, but that just there was more to do together. And in turn, asking ISCN, could you play a role, ISCN, in helping us do that? So we said, yes, we don't know what that means. We don't know how to, we've never had a chapter. We didn't envision having a chapter, but this sounds like an important thing to do, both to help organize sharing in a more local context, regional context, but then benefit from the linkages back to the global network across the world. So I'm really pleased. It's been a little bit stop and start through COVID for obvious reasons, but I'm pleased to say that we developed a new strategic plan recently, and I feel like we're just getting our footing, having just hosted our last in-person conference this year, 2023, in Mexico City at UNAM. So I would say that, that the momentum picked back up because we were able to get together in person. And we've just appointed a new coordinator to lead this work for us based in Cali, in Colombia. And UNAM will continue to stay involved. But we're really excited about this next iteration of what can the chapter do, and then how can we link back to any and all members who are interested in the Latin American context and work. So I'm really excited about our new ISCN Fellows program that we're launching shortly. So the idea being that ISCN Fellows will be sponsored by a member institution, and it could be students or staff or faculty who will play an important role in supporting one of the strategic initiatives of the network. So maybe it might be a new program. It might be playing a leadership role in convening a new thematic community of practice. And we've got a couple we're doing sort of a soft launch, if you will. We've got a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania who is helping us with our Latin American chapter work. We've had 2 graduate students from the University of Edinburgh who helped me with a couple of key research questions that I had related to the network. And we're going to be announcing this program in September and really gearing up. So we've identified a couple of senior fellows from member universities that we'll announce in September, who will be leading some strategic initiatives for the network. So it helps us advance work that we're interested in. It helps the member institution if it aligns to the work that they're interested in. And then it helps the network overall to really bring people together in a meaningful way. So I'm pretty excited about this. Of course, climate COP events. One of the strategic priorities in our strategic plan was for ISCN to have more impact and visibility on the global stage. We have a very significant number of top performing universities in the network. We should be doing more collectively globally. So COP26 was our first real sort of significant outreach, and we had an amazing opportunity. We were asked to co-host. I was engaged in some early conversations with the COP26 team, and we came up with this idea to co-host 2 meetings with COP26 President Alok Sharma on the important role of universities and global networks in the COP process. So we know that faculty experts and students have been part of COP processes for many, many years, typically though at an individual level. So an individual faculty expert will be tracking the negotiations or contributing, but not at the institutional level. And so we were really starting to wrestle with, could we imagine universities showing up in the same way that perhaps city mayors do? So city mayors are very well organized and have much more presence at a COP event than, for example, a group of university presidents. So the first meeting was convened with university presidents to have this conversation. And then the second meeting was convened with heads of networks like myself. And I'm really proud to say that it wasn't sort of a one-off event, but that it's now been moving from COP to COP. So this work has carried on. The UK Universities Network worked with an Egyptian Universities Network for COP27, and we are now in planning for COP28. And I was part of a conversation just in the last couple of weeks around what as networks are we doing as part of COP28. The other example of our COP26 presence, was a partnership that we're thinking more about how do we leverage other networks and other entities to advance the work. This was a partnership with Science Europe, the CESAR network, which is a European-based science and technology network, and the University of Strathclyde, of course, because COP26 was hosted in Glasgow. And we hosted a full day session on science for the net zero transition. So it was a virtual event, but we heard from research funders, we heard from university presidents, and we heard from network heads on the important role of all of these parties in advancing this work. And perhaps the most important outcome of that session was publishing a call to action for research organizations. So we convened again at COP27, and we invited other partners to join in the conversation. But we are now at a point thinking about how does this call to action get leveraged into COP28 and beyond. So last initiative is member peer exchange events. We only managed to do one last year, but this is something that I do want to have in a regular format. And this is bringing, probably 2 members together. In the case of the first one we did, we focused on the UBC Climate Action 2030 plan, which in particular, I would say is pushing the bounds on Scope 3 emissions. Not the experts, so don't ask me too many questions on Scope 3 emissions, but really contemplating looking much broader around climate action reduction targets. So we brought together the University of British Columbia and colleagues at Frye University in Berlin And they had a conversation on climate action planning with members present. And I'd really like to do these ongoing. So I'm open to any ideas that folks have. We've talked about conversations on green labs. We've talked about conversations on embedding SDGs in teaching and learning. So some folks have come up with some interesting things for us to think about. So that is a lot of information, and I'm sure that you have many questions, but I would like to maybe leave you with just a last couple of key points. So when I step back from all of that and say, really, what is the value of networks? I truly believe the value is many. There are many points of value, but in particular, threefold. So number one, don't underestimate the value of inspiration, of seeing what's possible at other universities, have concrete ideas on how to actually implement things in your own context. We know when we go away and we spend some time really thinking about what it is that we want to do, when we see examples of others doing it, we feel inspired. And that's a really important thing, especially for those of us that have been at this for a while. And it's easy to just kind of get in the day-to-day grind of it all and not feel inspired that the work that we're doing is incredibly important. So I think inspiration is really, really a key part of what we do. Learning from peers is incredibly important in any endeavor. So whether you're a grad student, you're wanting to learn from peers in your own university or beyond, we need to learn from each other. And this is especially important because we're all trying to figure this out at the same time right now. We don't have a roadmap for solving the climate emergency. We need to sort of connect with others and really move this work faster. So lastly, we must do more. We have to do more, and it has to be faster. I know firsthand, as I described at the beginning of this talk, we are incredibly resilient in the face of crisis. But I think we have limited bandwidth for dealing with all of these extreme climate events. We can't just keep having to deal with these extreme events. And I personally feel very committed, and I hope that I can do everything to be part of the solution. Because quite frankly, I love our forests and our ocean and our mountains way too much to not keep doing this to the best of my ability. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much for your time.